All right, welcome. Hadley's coming to us from the Cosmos. He's going to take the lead again. We're aiming to finish the preface of the first edition today. Maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. It's the first time in quite a while. All four of us have been on the same call, so that's a cause for celebration and interest. Um, I'm just handing over the hosting to Hadley so he can share his screen. We are deciding next time whether we will be doing the preface to the second edition or moving into the chapters themselves. Thank you for joining us. If you have been joining us, over to you, Hadley.
Cool. I'm just trying to get this to share. There we go. So we are approaching the end of the preface. We have done most of what I think is the argumentative setup for the preface of the A edition. So now what we'll be reading is sort of Kant's explanation of his own project, which will be discussing the way that he writes the book and why he writes the book in this way. So hopefully that won't take us too long, but we will see how it goes. I just want to double check, is the size of the text fine? Can everybody see?
Yeah, I can.
Cool. Yeah, so last week we read the sections where Kant was talking about philosophy's duty to be abolishing the semblance that arises from misinterpretations in philosophy. And he made the claim that he was going to solve all the problems of metaphysics, at least in outline, if not completely, so that people could continue to do that. And we'll be starting at, where is this? Just after he talks about the proofs for the immortality of the soul or the first beginning of the world. And yeah, I guess we'll take it from there. So I'm just going to start reading. That's fine.
Right, right.
We're about halfway down the page here. I'll highlight where we're reading from. So much for the completeness in reaching each of the ends, and for the comprehensiveness in reaching all of them together, which ends are not proposed arbitrarily, but are set up for us by the nature of cognition itself, as the matter of our critical investigation. Furthermore, certainty and clarity, two things that concern the form of the investigation, are to be viewed as essential demands, which may rightly be made on the author who ventures upon so slippery an undertaking. As far as certainty is concerned, I have myself pronounced the judgment that in this kind of inquiry it is in no way allowed to hold opinions, and that anything that even looks like an hypothesis is a forbidden commodity, which should not be put up for sale even at the lowest price, but must be confiscated as soon as it is discovered. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolutely necessary. And even more is this true of the determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of all apodictic philosophical certainty. Whether I have performed what I have just pledged in that respect remains wholly to the judgment of the reader, since it is appropriate for an author only to present the grounds, but not to judge about their effect on his judges. I think that's fine. Is there anything from there that you guys want to discuss?
Author's task is solely to reduce judgment. Sorry, I'm just trying to follow myself. All right.
So I guess there's a few points that we can quickly discuss before moving on. That beginning passage, so much for the completeness in reaching each of the ends of the investigation, and for the comprehensiveness in reaching all of them together, for achieving all the aims that he sets out to achieve at the same time. And he says, which ends are not proposed arbitrarily, but are set up for us by the nature of cognition itself as the matter of our critical investigation. So the ends, the sort of things that we're striving for in the Critique of Pure Reason, are allegedly, according to Kant, not just random. We don't just postulate ends, but somehow the content of our investigation is set up by the very nature of knowing. Knowing forms its own content and as such sets up the goals for what must become known throughout the investigation, which is a strange claim, I think, but it is the one that he's making, and it has resonances with the rest of the claims that he's making about how the critique of pure reason is going to leave every important question answered. There's going to be nothing unanswered in the questions. There's going to be no room for dissension. So I thought that was important. And then he says that there's no hypotheses allowed. Like there's going to be no hypotheses allowed, which is also an interesting claim. Like why ought there be no hypotheses?
Isn't it quite a? It's quite a. It's a strong claim as well.
Because there's no certainty in hypothesis. It seems to be seeking things which we can be certain about, right?
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to what he said last time we were reading, that if it can't answer everything, there's one thing that found the right way to say this. But we found ourselves unable to answer one of the things, then we might as well discard this man of inquiry altogether. Am I making sense? Am I making sense to you guys?
A little bit. You did cut out.
Yeah, could you repeat yourself?
Bit jumpy, the network.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was saying because it seems to be highlighting the necessity of certainty. Well, certainty and clarity, but certainty primary one. And this is making me think of what he was saying when we were reading last week about if this inquiry we're undertaking is unable to answer even one. Can you guys?
The end cut out for me. Cut out for me again.
Yeah, as well.
Don't worry, gents. Maybe I should just learn to shut up.
Not at all. I think you just cut out at the most important part, which is how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe write it out, or one of us can read it.
Oh yeah. We can use the chat here.
Mm-hmm.
Chat function.
I'm on the phone. That means I'd have to pick up the phone.
Oh no. It's Sunday afternoon. There's no chat.
Yeah, so while Sipho encouraged to pick up the phone, I'll ask the question and I'll maybe rephrase it. So Sipho said that if reason isn't apt to answer all its questions, then we might as well discard the principle. So I guess the reframed question is, what is a hypothesis and why shouldn't we trust a hypothesis to derive everything else from?
Yeah. What you
everything's based on hypothesis. Oh, sorry, Dan.
No, all good. It's Hadley, what you said a few moments ago in terms of the Kant expressing that he does not need to give any further material to reason other than the material that reason will give to itself. And he's going to attempt to move the project forward in that manner. It's hard to kind of think what he would mean exactly about what that would be, other than hypotheses. But then he says, I'm not going to use hypotheses.
Yeah, That's the difficulty, right? It seems like we've been postulating all this stuff from the beginning, but if they're postulates, then wouldn't that make the whole investigation subject to the postulates? And if the whole investigation was subject to the postulates, then wouldn't it be uncertain or as uncertain as the postulates are? Like,
Yeah.
there's a problem here. I think one that I'm probably not going to get into too much, but it seems to be there's a problem in terms of the hypothetical nature of the premises or whatever we want to call them. If
Yeah.
we want certainty and what we have is an opinion or a hypothesis, then anything that follows from the hypothesis will be as certain as the hypothesis. But what we need is something that guarantees the certainty of the hypothesis itself, right? We need some way of knowing that what we are basing our conclusions on is certain. But in order to know that, that thing would have to be more certain than the hypotheses that it is the justification for.
And I just wanted to ask, is if I'm following, that's what he means by these questions are not arbitrarily selected. They're prescribed to us by the very nature of knowledge itself, by this being the subject matter of this inquiry. That in some way, is he not looking for those things that are themselves certain, and therefore the basis upon which all other reasoning follows?
Yeah, I think that's, I haven't articulated as well as I think I can, but I think that's the crux, right? Is that we can't have hypotheses from which we're going to conduct this inquiry. Rather, we need to be finding those things that can be taken as secure starting points if we're going to have certainty. We need to be looking for the very content or material that is going to be suitable for justifying an investigation of the type we are undertaking.
There's the paragraph just above the one highlighted in terms of the certainty and clarity, things regarding the form of the investigation. So I assume that means like the manner in which it will be conducted, or like the way we move from the hypothesis. So is there a difference there in terms of like outcome or end and form, and where the appropriateness of our expectation for certainty should be?
Yeah, I mean, that's puzzling in and of itself. That didn't stick out to me before, but like the form, I guess, is like the structure of the investigation, whereas the matter is the content of the investigation. And so it seems like the content would be the end, right? Like the fulfilled thing is the end. But then the form would also be changed once it arrives at the end, because the form, the structure of whatever it is being articulated is different at different moments in the articulation. But it should still have this overarching unity to it. So I don't really know, but I think actually the line after the highlighted section should yield some clarity on this.
Yeah.
For every cognition that is supposed to be certain a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolutely necessary. And even more is this true of a determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of all apodictic philosophical certainty. So technical terms here: cognition a priori, absolutely necessary, I would imagine, and then apodictic certainty. This use of the term example is also interesting, but cognition is like you can think about it either, sometimes it's talked about as knowledge in like a very loose sense, and other times it's talked about as like the most basic form of mental representation. Like every mental representation is a cognition or is some cognitive representation. So either of those would work. So for every mental item or for every item of knowledge that is supposed to be certain a priori, which is independent of experience or not from experience, proclaims or alleges that it wants to be held to be absolutely necessary. What the kind of necessity here is interesting. Like what does absolute necessity mean? Because there are different kinds of necessity. There might be like logical necessity is one kind of absolute necessity, you would imagine. The principle of non-contradiction can't be denied without contradicting itself, something like that, or the law of excluded middle can't be denied without committing a fallacy. So that's another type of necessity, and it's unclear whether the necessity at issue is the same, but maybe there's different kinds of absolute necessity. And then, and even more, is this true of a determination of all pure knowledge independent of experience? And a determination of all pure knowledge independent of experience is supposed to be the standard and the example of all apodictic, I think is self-evident philosophical certainty.
It has a meaning in Aristotle. It's like universal and necessary premises, from universal and necessary premises to universal and necessary conclusions.
Interesting.
And absolutely certain as well. Cannot be false.
So he wants to have an absolutely certain system, and he wants to make the system stand as the example of what certain philosophy looks like, or what self-evident philosophy looks like. So this is supposed to be like the critique of pure reason is meant to be an exemplar of what metaphysics or philosophy ought to look like when it's done properly. We can see whether that's performed because it's unclear what that means right at the outset. But he goes on to say, whether I have performed what I have just pledged in that respect remains wholly to the judgment of the reader, since it is appropriate for an author only to present the grounds, but not to judge about the effect on his judges. So it's appropriate that he presents his arguments, but he shouldn't say, I've convinced you, or he shouldn't say that they're completely true or whatever. He should just say, here's the arguments, judge for yourself. You're the reader. You need to think about it. Right.
That actually reminds me of something in the rhetoric where he says you should not, the speaker should not, the legislature should leave as little up to the judge, and the judges should not take their instructions from the speaker as to the truth of what is the speaker's saying.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think it might
sorry.
even be like more mundane than that. I think that that's probably correct, but I think that it's like more mundane that if the thing is actually self-evident, then like it will be evident to others, or it ought to be evident to others. But
Yeah, I can buy that.
yeah, so let's continue just a little bit. But in order that he should not inadvertently be the cause of weakening his own arguments, the author may be permitted to note himself those places that, even though they pertain only to the incidental end of the work, may be the occasion for some mistrust, in order that he may in a timely manner counteract the influence that even the reader's slightest reservation on this point may have on his judgment over the chief end. So he's not trying to like convince us at the outset, but he also doesn't want us to misunderstand him. And I assume that the incidental end of the work is something like conviction, right? That it's like incidental to the work to convince us that the work is correct. But the chief end of the work is the correctness of the work itself. That has produced this a priori apodictic science is the important thing. But whether we're convinced or not will be accidental to the work. I think. I told you, like, this is like one of towards the end of this preface is where things start getting either very simple and easily interpretable, or I'm just missing them. and either of those is okay with me.
Yeah.
You guys okay with moving on?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
So he says, I am acquainted with no investigation more important for getting to the bottom of that faculty we call the understanding, and at the same time for the determination of the rules and boundaries of its use than those I have undertaken in the second chapter of the Transcendental Analytic, under the title Deduction of the Pure Concepts of the Understanding. They are also the investigations that have cost me the most, but I hope not unrewarded effort. This inquiry, which goes rather deep, has two sides. One side refers to the objects of the pure understanding and is supposed to demonstrate and make comprehensible the objective validity of its concepts a priori. Thus, it belongs essentially to my ends. The other side deals with the pure understanding itself, concerning its possibility and the powers of cognition on which itself rests. Thus, it considers it in a subjective relation, and although this exposition is of great importance in respect of my chief end, it does not belong essentially to it, because the chief question always remains, what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience, and not how is the faculty of thinking itself possible? Since the latter question is something like the search for a cause of a given effect, and is therefore something like a hypothesis, although, as I will elsewhere take the opportunity to show, this is not in fact how matters stand. It appears as if I am taking the liberty in this case of expressing an opinion, and that the reader might therefore be free to hold another opinion. In view of this, I must remind the reader in advance that even in case my subjective deduction does not produce the complete conviction that I expect, the objective deduction that is my primary concern would come into its full strength on what is said at pages A93, 92 to 93, should even be sufficient by itself.
Yeah,
That's a
go for it, Tom.
no. Just there's a lot going on there. I mean, what I mean is he's making some quite strong statements there.
What do you have in mind? What are the strong statements?
I'm just trying to follow where he weakening his arguments such as untimely. He says basically that you can't really disagree with me. It seems that he's saying that what I'm saying is a necessary precondition for thought, and yeah,
Well,
that he's not interested in the causes of thought, which I thought was an interesting.
Yeah, I wonder about these necessary preconditions for thought. He says, and not how is the faculty of thinking itself possible.
Oh, sorry.
So, I mean, but then he goes on to say, since the latter question is something like a search for a cause of a given effect and is therefore something like a hypothesis, although as I will also take the opportunity to show, this is not in fact how matters stand. So maybe it's the necessary preconditions for thinking. That's how a lot of people read it. And it might be the right way to read it. But also, it might just be what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience. The two questions might turn out to share like a common point.
Yeah.
Because he says, yeah.
He's framing it, at least in this paragraph, as the chief question is, it will always remain, what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience? And then that's already the sense of the context in which he's coming from, that has some kind of distinction between intellectual material and sensible material. So experience is appropriate to the sensation or what can be perceived. Reasoning that moves from that material that is sensible is not reason in itself or pure reason. And his project is of pure reason or critiquing pure reason, so it must be concerned with only that which is free of all experience. Then how is the fact that, and then so the question is not how is the faculty of thinking itself possible? How is that something like the search for the cause of a given effect.
Yeah, so think about it in terms of like cause and effect, right? We see, I don't know, a fire somewhere, and we say there's a fire, and we ask, how did the fire get there? What started the fire? What is the cause of this effect? I don't know, was it someone striking a match, or was it somebody using a lighter, or was it fire lighters? Heat? Like, was there just a lot of sun, and was the grass very dry? I think maybe that's one way to think about it, in like a very simplistic way.
Yeah.
There is thinking. We take thinking for granted, and then we attempt to explain what thinking arises
How
out
is
of.
it? How is it possible? Yeah. Like, how is it possible? What gives cause to it?
Yeah. But what's interesting about this question, and I'm not sure that I've done it justice in the example that I've given, is that he says that the latter is something like a cause for, like the search for the cause of a given effect, and is therefore something like a hypothesis, the very things that are supposed to be banned.
Yeah.
Although, as I will elsewhere take the opportunity to show, this is not in fact how matters stand. So it seems like we've got this kind of hypothetical thing that is not a hypothesis, that looks like the search for a cause for a given effect. And this investigation that we are allegedly not undertaking looks quite like that. But if that's non-hypothetical, if the question, how is thinking possible, is non-hypothetical, then it could be the very question that ought to be under investigation, and that is the appropriate material to think about when doing the critique of pure reason.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing that's, I guess, important to that is like, think about the derivation of a cause, like reasoning from effect to cause. I think it's what is this fallacy called? Can't remember. It's either affirming the consequent or denying the antecedent, but I imagine it's affirming the consequent. If A, then B, B, therefore A, in modus ponens, in the sort of inferential form.
Okay. Yeah.
If A, then B, B, therefore A. I wonder what a good example is. Like, if
The I can only think of your fire example. If if sticks then fire, therefore
yeah, therefore sticks.
Fire, therefore sticks.
Yeah, but fire could be made out of like coal or something else, I guess is the crux here, right? Like if A then B, so if sticks, then fire, fire therefore sticks. Even though sticks is a sufficient condition for fire, it's not necessary. And so if we deny, or if we affirm that there's fire, it doesn't necessarily follow that there will be sticks. There could be other sorts of things used as kindling material, like coal or fire lighters or gas.
so
So is this the sorry, Dan, keep going.
all good. The is so the error with the how is the faculty of thinking itself possible is the presumption of what thinking is, and the placing of the importance on what makes it possible. So it like hypothesizes something like thinking, or something like a faculty of thinking because of the effect of thinking.
I want to say that that question in itself is not wrong. That general approach might be wrong because in the domain of regular causes and effects, whatever cause and effect is, because we're going to find out that that's going to be complicated in a second. When we do that sort of reasoning, we end up with a problem because there can be for a given effect, there can be multiple causes or something like that. There might be more than one cause that has brought about the effect. So if we infer from effect to cause, we might get things wrong. But what's interesting about the question, how is the faculty of thinking itself possible, is that it's like this, but apparently not, right? The likeness always breaks down at some point. So we want to think maybe, well, I think one of the ways to read this and one of the ways to think about it is, and this will be a question that I think will only become answered later on in the text, because he doesn't actually say what the answer is why this question is something different from a hypothesis, or why it's not like the search for a cause from a given effect. What makes thinking?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to ask that very question. How does he separate these two questions?
Yeah, so we might want to keep that in the back of our minds as we continue to read.
We'll try.
Yeah,
We'll try, because this is a very, very dense text.
yeah.
One.
We'll get to that in a second. Like why, or how to go about keeping these little details in our mind as we go through the course of this massive text, because there's a line about that. Yeah, I think we should just push forward.
Yeah.
Although I do want to stop and quickly think about one last thing before I do. You brought it up earlier, Dan, and I missed the moment to talk about it. The chief question remains, what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience? And you brought up this distinction between the intellectual and the sensible. And the content from experience being that sort of stuff that's taken as not being reason, like purely reason-based. I wonder how he's using the word free here. Like, what does being free of experience mean at this in the text? I also don't think we're going to get an answer to it. But like, is the independence just a straightforward, like, it has no connection to experience? Is it just pure reasoning apart from all experience? And that's what pure reason is? Or is the freedom a freeing from experience? Like a subtraction of the matter experience away from the content?
Could you say it's like if there were two domains, two radical domains like oil and water, or as opposed to leaving the earth in a balloon?
Yeah, something like that. Like, is reason something completely separate from experience? Or is reason what's left over once we take away all the content of experience? Something like that.
Yeah.
It would be like, to use your balloon example, if it's not like a hot air balloon floating away, but rather if it's like a balloon is something that we blow up and fill with air. Is reason like the balloon to experience? Is it the structure that becomes impregnated with experience or is filled with experience? Or is it a radically separate entity from experience?
Maybe not. That's how he separates the two. Yeah, sorry.
Again, I don't think we should answer this, but I do think that it's important to think about the different ways in which reason could be free from experience. Like, it's important as well because another way to think of reason being free from experience would be, I imagine, something like the sight of the pure good or the forms or something like that. Like the forms in like a Platonic sense are not in experience. They're imitated by like sensible, perceivable things. But the good itself, the just itself, etc., don't appear in experience. So how we go about thinking about these pure things is important, I think. But let's move on before we get caught up in the weed. So yeah, finally, as regards clarity, the reader has a right to demand first discursive, logical clarity through concepts, but then also intuitive, aesthetic clarity through intuitions, that is through examples or other illustrations in concreto, I have taken sufficient care for the former, the logical, that was essential to my undertaking, but was also the contingent cause of the fact that I could not satisfy the second demand, which is less strict but still fair. There's an important distinction between concepts and intuitions that we will talk about more as we get into the text, but it's something to just be aware of for now. So I'm going to continue reading here. I have taken sufficient care for the former. That was essential to my undertaking, but was also the contingent cause of the fact that I could not satisfy the second demand, which is less strict but still fair. In the progress of my labor, I have been almost constantly undecided how to deal with this matter. Examples and illustrations always appeared necessary to me, and hence actually appeared in their proper place in the first draft. But then I looked at the size of my task and the many objects with which I would have to deal, and I became aware that this alone, treated in a dry, merely scholastic manner, would suffice to fill an extensive work. Thus, I found it inadvisable to swell it further with examples and illustrations, which are necessary only for a popular aim, especially since this work could never be made suitable for popular use, and real experts in the science do not have so much need for things to be made easy for them, although this would always be agreeable. Here, it could also have brought with it something counterproductive. The Abbé Terrasson says that if the size of a book is measured not by the number of pages, but by the time needed to understand it, then it can be said of many a book that it would be much shorter if it were not so short. But on the other hand, if we direct our view toward the intelligibility of a whole of speculative cognition that is wide-ranging and yet is connected in principle, we could with equal right say that many a book would have been much clearer if it had not been made quite so clear. For the aids to clarity help in the parts, but often confuse in the whole, since the reader cannot quickly enough attain a survey of the whole, and all their bright colors paint over and make unrecognizable the articulation or structure of the system, which yet matters most when it comes to judging its unity and soundness.
Which here is what chiefly concerns us. Just a small point. You said Abbé Terrasson. That must be a French. It must have been French because in English it's abbot.
Yeah, probably.
A-B-B-O-T. But in England they didn't really have monks because of the Protestant Reformation. But anyway.
Those damn Protestants.
Yes,
There was
those heretics. Those heretics, like Kant, who's raised by pietists.
I'm not. I like.
We don't want to
get myself
Tom
before I get cancelled.
No one cares what the Catholic Church says anymore.
No affiliation, Tom.
That line there, many a book would have been much clearer if it had not been quite so clear. And then the shortness and the length is dope.
Yeah.
Those are bangers. It's just like by the wayside, this him distinguishing his work from a popular work which would like embellish itself with examples and illustrations, which has also kind of been a theme in our series or our attempts to approach the text. Like we expand into life or examples, or like how might the material apply, and then we try to come closer to the text, and we move through this. I guess I'm just pointing to this basic structure or difference. I know that the philosophers Deleuze and Guattari, one of their aims was to become popular philosophers or pop philosophy, like to produce pop philosophy. So they found an aspiration in their work was to not produce what Kant was trying to produce, but to produce a text that was, philosophy that was popular.
I wonder if you're like, so we're going to get lost in the parts quickly.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you're like equivocating on popular, because I think that it's true that Deleuze and Guattari wanted to write popular books, but like, I think popular probably just had a certain meaning in Kant's context. And I imagine like the popular philosophy was like common sense philosophy, or like Hume's philosophy was written for like popular audiences, from what I remember. Like,
Yes, he was very clear about that.
yeah, Hume says that he writes for a popular audience at several places. I think in the Inquiry for the Human Understanding, in the second edition, he says that he's doing popular philosophy. Which is crazy because like we'd never think of Hume as popular philosophy now, I would imagine. Like Hume isn't being sold in the bookshops and being read by everybody, although he should be.
Yeah.
And in terms of like the illustrations and examples, like we might think, because he said this intuitions and aesthetic clarity, that like I think when I first read this, I thought he meant like drawings, like illustrations, like
Yeah.
examples and things like that. But I think he means like elucidatory arguments that give examples and illustrate the principle behind it. So like
Yes.
again, think of Hume like the way that Hume writes. Like it's so rich and fluid, and he'll say things like, if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow, right, is his example to show that like causality can come under doubt, that like we can logically think that the sun won't rise tomorrow, but like in reality, it seems imperceivable that tomorrow the sun won't rise. Is I think Hume's famous example. And so I
Yeah.
think those are the sorts of examples that he's talking about. These like illustrations through um, demonstration where you show the application of a principle. Um, but then I think there's
Yeah.
an interesting point about popularity. So on the one hand, I think you're equivocating, which is fine. And then on the other hand, like it is weird that Deleuze and Guattari have the aim of popular philosophy, like of being easily
Aren't they?
um, and it's weird that Kant says that a book like this can never be suitable for popular aim. Like metaphysics is not suitable for the populace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most people will give up after page 2 easily. I can
Yeah,
guarantee you.
sure. But I mean, think about how bizarre that is in line with his like. So it's probably true that most people will give up by the second page of the Critique of Pure Reason, but it's also true that I suspect, I hope, that the types of beings that can engage in reading a book like the Critique of Pure Reason are themselves reasoners. Like, insofar as they're capable of reason, they'd be
Yeah.
able to read the Critique of Pure Reason, which seems to suggest that, like, either, some people just aren't rational in that way and can't understand reason, which maybe is not so controversial, I claim. Maybe there are some dumb people out there. Um, or, like, Kant's undermining his own claims because reason should be accessible to all. Like everybody who has reason can presumably think through the book.
Wouldn't he? I don't know. I was thinking of this. He says, because he says earlier that for the first sufficient, he says he's not going to give examples, right?
Mhm.
And he says here that sometimes that more popular stuff is actually more unclear because it is clear. And I think what he's trying to get at there is I mean, I use this technique when I read, is sometimes I take a philosopher at his word when he uses an example as a way of threading through the principle. You thread the principle through the example. And I don't know, maybe Larry suggested that that's the wrong way of reading. I don't know. And so sometimes what he's perhaps suggesting is that the use of example, especially when you're trying to talk about pure reason, that is reason outside of experience, because example is always going to come from particulars and things that are in experience, is going to confuse the task.
Yeah, so I agree completely with that, that like the example is going to be from experience and then it's going to detract from the reasoning itself, whatever that means. But And I also agree that like he is thinking about the clarity of the whole of the book and not getting lost in its parts through examples. I'm just wondering about this like popular aim. Like should this is one of the like I shall come out of my shell and reveal myself for a moment. this is one of the parts like Kant's philosophy that I'm not sure about. Like whether philosophy should be for everybody or for a select group of people. I know that a select group of people are currently practicing it. There's only 4 of us reading this text online, and I don't know how many followers you have, Dan, but I'm going to the spectrum.
No, we're averaging 11 views.
So the fact is that it is currently practiced as a special science, something that is for a select group of people. But I wonder if philosophy is supposed to deal with, this is my personal quibble and not even like a textual quibble, if that philosophy is supposed to deal with universal truths, or is supposed to deal with the universal, and the universal is something inaccessible to certain individuals, that philosophy fails to be universal.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it an account? Okay, sorry, we are getting a bit lost, but isn't it an account of the universal? It deals in the universal, yes, but the shoemaker uses reason. He doesn't inquire into it. He inquires into shoemaking.
So what's the difference between, like, I understand that it uses the universal, but what's the difference between saying that you're going to state a universal truth and then having it not be recognized as universal, or having it be something that is inherently unrecognizable as universal?
Because I guess it's because you're trying to derive something that's like the shoe is universally recognizable, but the process of making a shoe and deriving a shoe are not universally recognizable.
Yeah, but Kant doesn't say that you can understand the conclusions of the text without understanding how the text came to its conclusions. He's not Hegel. He doesn't care that much about the process, I don't think.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. Sorry.
So the shoe, you're using an example, so you're switching to an analogy.
Sorry, I can't help it.
It's fine.
I'm a lazy thinker.
The shoe would be to philosophy as the conclusion is. It's the result of the process of making, right? We take all these ingredients and we put them together in some rational, organized way, and then everybody can recognize that it's a shoe once it's a shoe. But not the ordinary man wouldn't recognize it from the pieces of leather and the lace and the seam or whatever just lying on the floor there. That's fine. I'm happy with that. But the way you make it up is as if the universal is some dead and lifeless thing lying on the ground that once it gets put into the appropriate form, once we have arguments and come to a conclusion, then philosophy will have a fully made shoe or something like that. It'll put all the parts together and make a rational whole. But the difference or the disanalogy between the parallel that you're trying to draw is that in the shoemaker case, once the process of reasoning is done, everybody can recognize the result of reason. But in the critique of pure reason case, that doesn't seem to be the case. Once the critique of pure reason is done and we come to the conclusions, the book is not for everybody, allegedly. And so does everybody recognize the conclusions, or what is the relationship between the metaphysician and everybody else? Like, is there?
Okay, but okay, you're right. There is definitely a disanalogy in that aspect. But something a bit like me and the shoemaker would share the same problem with regard, say, a mathematical proof or the derivation of certain mathematical proofs. We can't follow them. We're not mathematically trained. It requires a certain degree of training, yes, but that doesn't detract from the universality of the mathematics that's thereby given.
Well, the mathematics is again a strange example because mathematics and its rationality presumes that everybody, like one of the benefits of mathematics and what makes it universal is that presumably everybody can be trained into it, right? Like,
oh, okay. I see what you in that respect. I'm on board with you.
Like the same boy in the Mino comes to recognize the way to get to the double of the square through a series of instructions and through some process of learning, which Plato will call recollection.
But
what makes that so attractive to us is that it's precisely suitable for a popular aim. It can become popularized. So this is not super important, but I think it is like a question to hold. If Kant is doing a critique of pure reason, and reason is supposed to be rationally inquiring into itself, but that can't be popular or can't be made suitable for a popular aim, does that mean that not everything has reason or not everything is capable of reasoning? Is reason something that comes on the scene at some given point? Do only certain beings have reason? And like, who does metaphysics? Like, who is supposed to do philosophy? This is a separate question from the critique of pure reason, but it is a question that is important, especially in our day and age, where we're trying to think about philosophy. We're trying to think about the theme of this whole thing that I set up was meant to be something like, how is it possible to change the world? Was the way that I set it up. And I said that, Kant is going to change the world, both ontologically and epistemologically and practically. And those things are going to go hand in hand together. And though we could just go through the text, part of the reason that I'm interested in this question is because there are certain people, even certain people in this group, that probably wouldn't have been able to be included in this philosophical project historically because they weren't capable, in quotation marks, of engaging this text. Like, they were the type of beings capable of engaging in pure reason. They were
like a race theory.
Yeah, I mean, one of the places that Kant gets problematized is that a lot of people claim that Kant was a racist, and that comes from like the reading of his anthropology. I haven't read the anthropology, so I don't know if that's true. And the racism thing is annoying for the most part because it does hinder an actual evaluation of the text. Like, it's hard to get into the text where there's all these blockages and where people want to burn the books and get rid of them forever. But the difficult truth is, and maybe this is where like I slightly break with the tradition that we're coming out of, with like the text for the text's sake, as we've had people teach us.
Sola scripture.
Yeah. But that sort of like reading is important, but equally important is the recognition, like you can't take a text seriously without taking seriously all of its parts, right? Like maybe there's issues. And if we just sweep those under the rug and say, he's got to be right, then are we even engaged in the process of philosophizing? Like, are we even calling?
It ceases to be alive, as you were saying.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I'm just wondering about this relationship between the individual and the universal, and science. Like, is science for everybody, or is it just for experts? Is philosophy for everybody, or is it just for experts? Or is this just the way that like society is structured, that like not everybody has the time and the effort to expend on doing philosophy?
Yeah.
Politically, I guess.
Well,
a separate question than the theoretical question of what pure reason is, but there seems to be a politics that will probably come out of this. I don't know. I haven't read Kant's other works on that sort of stuff, but
yeah,
I would imagine that like just as Plato has the philosopher kings in the Republic that need to have like the special status, that there's going to be special segments in society for each job, and the philosopher is going to be a separate job. Whereas maybe people like Deleuze and Guattari, who I haven't read a lot of, think that philosophy is meant to be done by every person, that like it is a fundamental part of what it is to be a human. And becoming an expert in the field is not as important as partaking in the practice. Like, I don't know. Do I want everybody to write a critique of pure reason? Probably not. But do I want everybody to be able to read and engage in the philosophy that's going on here? Probably. I'm making too much of a big deal out of this passage, but
No,
No,
no, you're not. No, Hadley. What you're actually pointing to is probably one of the more interesting passages for us in our time, as
yeah,
there's a
as you've been highlighting throughout your monologue of sorts.
there's a there's a there's an irony, but before that, there's I think Deleuze and Guattari write a book, What is Philosophy, like towards the end of their philosophizing, which is the interest. I think it's published like one of their later published books. It's just an interesting note, and that's like snippet that they're aiming for a pop philosophy in form or style, which is in this area of what we've been speaking. But the irony, and I think it came out earlier in the series in the language of castration, that like as like the book is the critique of pure reason. So there is this sense of like the way in which you say metaphysics or the use of reason has been inflated in the sense of what it is appropriate to or applying to, and has, I'm forgetting the exact language at the beginning of the preface, but the whole framing of the book seems to be like a castrating of that manner or mode of metaphysics to give reason to its proper domain. So, but then what you were bringing up now, Hadley, in terms of the sense of exclusiveness, about or of the material or of the way into the material, or the I guess I'm just pointing to those two facets that are kind of in tension, because there seems to be this impulse to, as
What
I
about?
used, yeah.
No, sorry, Dan. Sorry, Dan. No, I thought the solution might be art itself. That art should be the vehicle through which, because to be fair, this is quite a dry book. Sorry, Hadley.
No, I
And
don't. No ways,
I
dude.
sorry, it just struck me. I was thinking of classical music, and a lot of people say, you know, that's a Western construct, but my experience has been that people just love classical music. It doesn't take too much training to appreciate it. But a lot of people who would be like, you know, prepare the same kind of it bears the same kind of analysis, and maybe that's the vehicle through which, if you want to have people engage philosophy, pure reason or Aristotle, really the way to do it is through art, because most people, well, they're shoemakers. They don't have they don't know what a priori means, and that, you know, that learning, you know, they can't just pick it up and read it.
You're being very revealing of your thoughts.
In what way?
Most people are shoemakers.
You know what I mean?
I haven't met a shoemaker since the Industrial Revolution, Tom. No, I'm joking. It's not important, but I think we should move on swiftly in a second.
Yeah.
But I think the question here is like, so the way that you phrased it, Dan, and I think, Tom, that there's like something interesting going on in terms of like the art thing that might be relevant later on, but not right now, is you said that like there's this question about the content and the form of the work. And maybe I just have been reading Hegel recently, and in the preface that you were talking about earlier, he talks about like philosophy being for everybody. And you might say, well, Hegel's even less than Kant in terms of readability, but whatever. Um, Either way, it seems like a bizarre claim to make on the one hand, because metaphysics is in some senses the study of being, whatever that means. And that turns out to mean many things for many different people. Aristotle will say that being is said in many ways, and so metaphysics must study one of the ways that being is said, and as such would probably be some exclusive place, like some exclusive domain for the philosopher to study. Kant is thinking about like whether metaphysics is possible and even how it is, I think is how he phrases it elsewhere. And so there's this figuring out of the scope of metaphysics. Like metaphysics is a weird science because it's the one science that has to figure out its own scope. It can't take for granted what its subject matter is, because if it takes for granted what its subject matter is, then it will be subject to the hypothesis that it begins upon. And so the question is like, have we formulated the scope correctly? Because if it's the study of being, and being must cover all things, everything that is a being, then it seems like metaphysics must be for all, because everybody that is a being is within this realm and can access being. All beings have access to being or something like that. But that's not even in the languaging of Kant, I don't think. So this is like a very late critique, so to speak. And then the other question is like, but what if it's not supposed to be for everybody? Like maybe there are experts and maybe we should have the master craftsman, the master shoemaker that makes shoes for everybody. Like the shoemaker, to return to Tom's analogy, is interesting because even if the public can't recognize the shoes, they can still use the shoes. So like the shoemaker makes the shoes, but then the public ends up wearing them. And if we look at the influence and the impact of Kant, even though Kant hasn't made a system that's accessible to all individuals, the amount of influence, I would argue, that he's had on the philosophical and the theoretical landscape shows that it is universal in some way, because the effects have been universal effects. They've impacted the rest, they've impacted everything, so to speak. Like I was out with someone on Friday and they said something like, yeah, we wouldn't be able to have this experience that we're having without like our ideas informing our perception. We were kind of talking about philosophy, but they said that like very loosely. And in my head, I was like, oh yeah, that's just Kant, right? Like that's not it's not just the standard way of thinking about the world. Like they don't think about the world in terms of our mind shaping reality. That's a very Kantian, post-Kantian like worldview. There are realists that think that the world is the way that it is, and we take in the information, right? Like we are mirrored.
I mean, I love this. Like, what is obvious to us is not like it hasn't been eternally obvious. It's most likely an inheritance, and we get the sharpest vision of where these inheritances are formed in philosophy. So this is like one of the deep values of studying philosophy and the history of philosophy is you see the movement of thought. You also see the movement of how I come to obviously experience reality is in fact an inheritance of a development in thought. And then like in terms of also the just cultural impact and influence, like some of the Christian communities that I have contact with, like they have a kind of, they make a kind of boogeyman out of critical theory, which is there's deep influence from Kant there, because if you take just the general shorthand, like Kant radicalizes the subject or deeply internalize it as conditioning experience or creating the conditions for experience. Downstream of that, you get this like social constructivism where everything is just constructed. There aren't real things objective in the world. And so gender is something that I can construct. And so now the Christian who I've propped up as being opposite would say that this is against the Genesis account of what it means to be a person, and so the source of the evil is in the critical theory and its fathers like Kant and the Frankfurt School and blah 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 blah. Blah. So like these things are so frustrating because the this I'll encounter this kind of thing, and now this is where a value of having studied with Larry was just like astoundingly apparent in this context of people gathered Christians, that this essentially a sophist or a soothsayer, a sophist comes and he speaks over this audience as if he's identified where the enemy is. or what, and it's this train of thought, the Frankfurt School, critical theory, etc. Now, he doesn't induce the crowd into reasoning. He impacts them on the idea of where the enemy is. They left with that imprint. And then, so like I encounter someone who was part of that process a year before, and all that is left in him is the idea that the enemy has been correctly identified, and there's a right position to be standing in relation to where the enemy is. And he will say this thing of like exactly what I started with, that whatever you see in the world now, its deeper root is in some idea that somebody formulated sometime. But he will not then go and think. He will say that I'm glad I had this opportunity to express some of this frustration, because it's this expression of the value of thinking and then complete avoidance of thinking, because the person so inclined thinks they possess the correct idea. I think it goes both ways. It's both the idea of what the good is or who the enemy to my project or worldview is. And once that's solidified in someone's reason, someone's soul, it's like it's corrosive, but
Corrosive.
Yeah.
I mean, corrosive is maybe like euphemistic.
Jeez.
That's also why I like brought this passage up, and like I'm happy to get lost in the thoughts again for a little bit. Is because like I'm a reader of Kant. I'm a long time reader of Kant. I will suggest his work to almost anybody because I think it's some of the best work in philosophy. But that doesn't mean I don't think it has problems. Like, that doesn't mean I don't think that there's issues in Kant, or that doesn't mean that I think he's got everything right. I just think it's a good text to read. He makes good arguments, he makes good points, and I think a large portion of it is correct. But that doesn't mean that there's not like issues in it. But the issues, like on the one hand, there's this. I think that it's great, and we should all read it. And on the other hand, I think that there's issues. But I think like the issues are an important piece of the work. Like we've got this artifact. It was made by a person. People are not perfect in general. And so we get this artifact, and the question is like, what do we do with it? Like, do we just say like Kant's critical theory and the Frankfurt School are the enemies? Like, whatever that means. Or do we expend some time reading it and then finding what the valuable parts of the text are? Like, are there parts that can come apart from the whole that are not essential to the whole? Like, is this claim that the popular aim of metaphysics is unacceptable? Is that a formative feature of the work as a whole? Is that something essential to Kant's viewpoint? And if it is, do we have to get rid of the whole theory? I suspect not, maybe. But if it isn't, then can we tease apart those aspects of the work that suck, and can we get something valuable from it, or can we develop the work further? Like, if this is really a problem, and it turns out that like the limitation of reason is itself an unreasonable thing to be doing, then how do we fix that? Like, what does a philosophy look like that leaves reason unlimited, but doesn't do so in a way that alienates like reasoners and the like people with the ability to reason? Because on the other hand, like I want to say like reason unhinged is oftentimes like too much for people. Like people don't like it when like you get rid of like all the content of experience, or when you say like pure reason, like whatever that means, it just comes off as like kind of pretentious and bizarre and like unthinkable for some reason. And yet the very thinking that they're doing is a reasoning, so it must be possible. And so I think like the key in engaging, or the value of engaging in historical texts, is being able to sort of see the genesis of an idea, to understand like that the idea has a history and that it comes on the scene at a certain point, and that like that has its own implications. And then also to be able to not do what the person persuaded by the preacher or whoever you're talking about in your speech was down, like to not just go away angry and to have an enemy, but to like to battle it out and to be committed to like thinking through toward some sort of reconciliation, like thinking through towards understanding the text, towards understanding where this person is coming from, towards understanding how their ideas are working and which ones actually work and which ones don't, because it's a text, right? Like maybe there are some things that work, maybe there are some things that don't. The only way that you'll know is by doing the hard work of reading it, like, and judging for yourself. And I think more so than reading a text like this, that's the invaluable skill that I've gained from philosophy, is just being open to hearing things out and mulling them over and going, yeah, that does sound kind of ridiculous. But let me think about it and come to a conclusion about it and see how, whether it's right or wrong, and if it's not, how we can fix it, or if it's like completely like valueless, like why we should let it go. Like those seem to be a large part of where the value of doing philosophy is. And I think metaphysics is especially valuable for that because it requires a lot of patience.
Yeah.
You guys ever wondered how we judge whether things are right or wrong for us is? Because that seems to be there out of the blue.
Sorry, Sipho, I didn't hear you. Did you say something after you said right and wrong?
I don't think I said anything after that. I said that just seems to be there out of the blue.
Okay.
Judgment.
Yeah. I think that's the interesting part, right? Like he says this is going to be the exemplar for how to do metaphysics, and then he's saying that like the aids to clarity help in the parts, but confuse in the whole, since the reader cannot quickly enough attain a survey of the whole, and all their bright colors paint over and make unrecognizable the articulation or structure of the system, which yet matters most when it comes to judging its unity and soundness. So there's like, from that I get that there's like some underlying unity or structure in this text, and that the unity and soundness of that structure is going to be what's going to allow us to judge whether it's correct or not. Like somehow we can't bring to the text our own external standards when judging. Because if we do that, we rupture the unity of the text. And so we need to be searching for like those principles and those like key, the essential lines that shape what the text is. Which is itself like, how do we do that? How does one communicate that? I don't know. But occasionally it happens that we find like the central project and figure out whether the central project is solved or not solved. Which is why I think I've been trying to set up for so long what is even going on in the text like this, which will continuously come up again and again, I think. Shall we read on those?
Yeah.
It can, as it seems to me, be no small inducement for the reader to unite his effort with that of the author, when he has the prospect of carrying out, according to the outline given above, a great and important piece of work, and that in a complete and lasting way. Now, metaphysics, according to the concepts we will give of it here, is the only one of all the sciences that may promise that little but unified effort, and that indeed in a short time will complete it in such a way that nothing remains to posterity except to adapt it in a didactic manner to its intentions, yet without being able to add to its content in the least. For it is nothing but the inventory of all we possess through pure reason ordered systematically. Nothing here can escape us, because what reason brings forth entirely out of itself cannot be hidden, but is brought to light by reason itself as soon as reason's common principle has been discovered. The perfect unity of this kind of cognition and the fact that it arises solely out of pure concepts, without any influences that would extend or increase it from experience, or even particular intuition, which would lead to a determined experience, make this unconditioned completeness not only feasible, but also necessary. I'm going to read the translation of the Latin because I don't know how to read Latin. Dwell in your own house, and you will know how simple your possessions are. Perseus.
Right.
So I think that speaks to what Sipho was speaking about how we come to judge the work, right? Kant is urging us to unite our efforts with him because he thinks that the work is going to be great, important, long-lasting, complete. And metaphysics, as it's so conceived by Kant, is the only science, which is a big claim, that may promise that the united effort of the author and the reader can complete it in such a way that once we're done doing metaphysics, we're done. All that remains to posterity is to adapt it in a didactic manner without adding to it. Metaphysics will be complete.
To be done again and again and again.
Yeah, just adapt it, right? Just take it up again. Like the actual work of metaphysics or the content of metaphysics, then if this is true, all lies in this text. And all that's left for us to do is to unite our aims with Kant and then read the text, get all the content up, and we'll be, AOA.
Yeah, that beginning, that first bit that you read was so appropriate for what we had just been lost in.
Yeah.
It was emboldening. How can you say this is dry, Thomas?
With a very straight face.
Yeah, let's continue, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll get caught up in the plots. Such a system of pure speculative reason, I hope myself to deliver under the title Metaphysics of Nature, which will be not half so extensive, but will be incomparably richer in content than this critique, which had first to display the sources and conditions of its possibility, and needed to clear and level a ground that was completely overgrown. Here I expect from my reader the patience and impartiality of a judge, but there I will expect the cooperative spirit and assistance of a fellow worker, for however completely the principles of the system may be expounded in the critique, the comprehensiveness of the system itself requires also that no derivative concept should be lacking, which however cannot be estimated a priori in one leap, but must be gradually sought out. Likewise, just as in the former, the whole synthesis of concept has been exhausted, so in the latter, it would be additionally demanded that the same thing should take place in respect of the analysis, which would be easy and more entertainment than labor. So, kind of short. Insofar as I understand it, he's just plugging his other text, the Metaphysics of Nature, where from what he's proved in the Critique of Pure Reason, he will derive everything else, whatever that covers, whatever nature is. And he'll do that by analyzing the synthetic concepts that he's proved. And there he expects us to work together with him, whereas here he expects us to be patient and impartial like judges. Yeah. Any other comments on that passage?
No, I was enjoying the flow of the text.
Yeah, let's continue then. I have only a few more things to remark with respect to the book's printing. Since the beginning of the printing was somewhat delayed, I was able to see only about half the proof sheets, in which I have come upon a few printing errors, though none that confuse the sense, except the one occurring at page A379, fourth line from the bottom, where specific should be read in place of skeptical. The antinomy of pure reason from page A425 to page A46 is arranged in the manner of a table, so that everything belonging to the thesis always continues on the left side and what belongs to the antithesis on the right side, which I did in order to make it easier to compare proposition and counterproposition with one another. And that's the end of the preface.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just saying what's going to happen. We'll see why thesis and antithesis, statement and counterstatement are placed that way. We'll see what the issue is when we get to A379, if we ever remember that. But
Yeah.
it's like textual things, like the printers. I think he sent off the work to be printed pretty quickly. And from what I have read, like Kant doesn't like to read his proofs. Like after he's done, he like just sent them in, which is just a but also I think the first edition of the Critique of Pure Reason was under work for like 7 years. So I imagine like after 7 years, you just send off the work and be like, yep, it's time to let go. At some point, you just gotta let it go. There's gonna be.
You've shared before that he had quite a severe fear of dying before he had finished his work.
Yeah.
So you gotta get it on.
That's
how to reach your deadline.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know why you're looking. It's a reasonable fear to have. That keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I mean, that's also another important lesson to learn is like you got to just let go at some point. If Kant could just let go when you write your thesis, you probably just gotta, try. There'll be errors. Hopefully, the errors aren't
Just
errors.
let it go.
Yeah.
Hey, gents, easier said than done. Easier said than done.
I'm wondering, I don't know if it would be rude, but should we look at the table on? Should we look at the table at 425 of thesis antithesis? Would that be
done?
I think part of me says I think we should leave it until we get there.
okay?
The antinomy is
Natural flow.
Yeah, well, that and like, I mean, if we ever get there next year sometime, I would.
Yeah.
The antinomy is such a special piece of philosophy that like it feels bad to ruin it, but not just
okay.
like people, I guess. So now that we're done the preface, we're probably just talking until the end of this. But like certain interpreters of the Critique of Pure Reason prefer certain parts to other parts. Like some people prefer the transcendental deduction and think that that's the most important part of the book. Some people think the transcendental dialectic is the most important. Some people think the transcendental aesthetic is the most important. Part of me says they're all equally important, but man, is the dialectic and the antinomy of pure reason an experience. It's like that's one of the moments that I think sets the key stage for how philosophy will proceed in the future. And it's just not worth ruining that. I don't think. I mean, you guys can look at it if you want to. You have the text.
But you can't look at it without guilt now.
You're just robbing yourself of like a
surprise.
Like that was my favorite thing that I came across in the first time I read the Critique of Pure Reason. Like, and I mean, there's so many good things in the Critique of Pure Reason, but that's just like, it's a moment in text where you're like, what is this person doing?
I'm slowly becoming like reflective and aware of the kind of mode that gets engaged a lot on or in our groups and on this channel, which is like it's kind of and it's appropriate that the names Deleuze and Guattari came up, like, because it's kind of rhizomatic. It's like very multiple. It's like not just extracting the key points from the text so that the executive summary can be given and distributed and created in a strict handout. You know, like there's this expanding and narrowing in and getting really absorbed into one and then meandering off into a direction, like in terms of what it implicates in terms of our own lives. And slowly I'm coming to a peace with uh, this kind of mode, or this kind of way of going about things. And I even think that it's kind of supported by the network technology that we use. Like, we constantly bombarded with fragments, with the little pieces of information, and they create some kind of semblance, or we have to try and become naturalized to this kind of information stream, which makes really studying one text from beginning to end probably quite valuable in terms of its antithesis of this mode of what or how we otherwise consuming information or being encountered with or by information. So this is my argument for like taking a rhizomatic underneath all the text and then popping up at the antinomies for a moment, and then no, that's not what I'm proposing. Yeah, I'm
Well, I
happy
mean,
to.
just the way that you put it, Dan, is like super
Yeah.
important. I've been talking to the Dr. Bryant about this recently this week, because I've been like, I guess sometimes I'm upset at like the systems, because I'm grumpy as a human being. But the way that you said that, right? Like, we're not just going straight through the text so that we can prepare a handout. Like, of course not. Like, is that the end of philosophy? Is just to like type up some notes and then, translate those notes so that your first years can understand them in plain English? Like, maybe to some people, that's like the end of reasoning. Like, reasoning is to get the product so that we can sell education, so that
Yeah.
we can
Then you.
people to learn and like quantify and say that they got a grade on this test and that we graded this objectively, and that everybody now understands 79.5% of the critique of pure reason. Yeah, maybe that could be it. Part of me says that I'd be very disappointed if that was it. Like,
Yeah.
that like if the project was to create a handout. I think what's valuable about this channel, if we take like a little moment to ramble about this channel, is that it provides a space for philosophizing that is unconstrained by those like institutional constraints, which, don't get me wrong, I think they're super useful as well. Learning how to make a handout and articulate yourself to first years and grading first year work and beyond is a really useful skill, because you get better at communicating yourself and you understand how other people work and you see what people get from the subject matter. But one of the underrated skills is to just let yourself be absorbed in a text, and to let that text, like, the languaging here is so gross, like penetrate your life world, like become like a part of your life. Like, so the question is like, is philosophy a science? Is philosophy like just a theoretical subject matter that we, get the fact sheet for and then drop the facts on people? Or is it like a practice, a way of life? And I think like the channel really speaks to the way of life method of philosophizing, because like there's distractions. There's moments of getting caught up in these little things, and there's like wanderings. There's moments where we get it wrong, and there's moments where we get it right. But the medium is the message. Like, we're always doing the thing that is philosophy when we're trying to do these texts. And sometimes taking them seriously and line by line stating the argument. And other times it means getting lost in a half-hour ramble on whether Kant is accessible or not. Like, reasoning is both.
the as you were speaking, I was hoping that it was recording you with the background that you have, but it might have just been the text that was just like this text and then these voices.
Voices from the text.
Sometimes it just happens.
I've also been thinking a lot about the text before we go. And I mean, it'd be nice to hear what you guys think about this. Like, I've been thinking about writing a lot because I have to do a lot of writing for the PhD, obviously. And I've been thinking about philosophical texts and like why or how to write them, which means I'm thinking about what a text is. Um, and philosophy is weird because like it takes many shapes and forms. Nowadays, I guess most commonly it takes like journal article is the format. But the critique of pure reason has a very weird form to it. And the form is very much informed by like whatever Kant is trying to communicate. Similarly with like things like Spinoza's ethics that are like in geometrical order, or like Kierkegaard's like fictional tales, like all of these texts take their own weird shape and form. And so too with this practice of like meeting on Zoom, the form is usually appropriate to like the content. But then the question becomes like, what is the text? Is it just ink on a page? Is it just a series of assertions? Is it a challenge? Like, what are we supposed to do with this artifact? Right? Like we could pick it up and read it. We could throw it away. We could burn it. We could pore over line by line. And maybe there's not one right way to approach it, but it's at least a good question, I think. Like,
Yeah.
what it is, what a philosophical text is, and how we ought to approach it.
Yeah. Big time. This I mean, I think the virtue is there in exactly what you said. It's like it's constantly bringing the question or reapproaching or and I think this structural the fact of a collective endeavor is also really important. Larry was sharing with us last week that or his own frustrations with his more academic writing. Finding it difficult, and he was contrasting that with the being engaged in dialogue with another. Like one of the things that he said was when he's writing, he just finds the expanse of the direction in which he could go in as being very distracting or like disabling, because he gets going and then you just all this opportunity or potential directions to take it. Whereas if you're engaged in dialogue with another, there's this constant feedback or back and forth. You're responding to what's being gathered, and then something that we found to be of immense value or benefit is having that grounded in the text. And there's something just almost about that. I mean, like a proper relationship to the Bible is one in which you spend a lifetime with it, like you keep returning to it, and that process of like being informed by it, moving away from it, and returning to it, and seeing how you change in relation to it, and how maybe it even changes in relation to your own change, is then part of that. Like that's also where you can't substitute, I think, just time and effort that is spent with something or with something like a text. And then yeah, let me leave it there.
I guess like the thing about like the text and the written text, I imagine, and like speaking is like they're all different forms of like relationships, right? Like there's a relationship that's going on between like the teacher and the taught, or like the speaker and the other person that they're speaking to. And like what's really nice about these is like there's a moment to laugh, there's like a moment to like tell a joke or like stumble on something funny, or to like get angry at like a Tom's analogy about shoes. Sorry, Tom. But
There's a real shoe in.
there's there's these moments, and they like yield reprieve from like the tough work that is doing the text. And when you write, there often isn't that. There's just like blank space and anxiety about what word to put down next. But reading also has like a relationship. Like the way that I read the Critique of Pure Reason has changed completely over like the past 5 years. Like when I first started, I was like, I don't know. I don't think any of this is convincing. I dislike Kant because of like something that I've heard about him. Then like my masters, like I convinced myself that he must be correct because like I guess I was writing a thesis on him. And he sounded correct. I suspect he is largely correct in a lot of the stuff. And now that I'm like not writing a thesis on him, I think he's invaluable as a source of philosophical information. Is everything he says correct? I don't know.
Like, this is from the preface alone. This book seems super interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into the second preface.
Yeah, I'm already sold by the first preface. Like, cause the way the guy set this up, claiming he's about to do some big things, and all I want to see is, first and foremost, more than if he does it, I want to see how he does it. Like all these games, especially where it's like it's gonna do it in such a way that it answers everything. I'm like, everything. Like, okay, I need to find out if it's gonna live up to the claims. Plus, I'm also so curious. How he uses certain terminology. Yeah,
I didn't catch anything there after curious.
I'm really. I'll say I'm curious. After hearing Hadley explain some of the terminology that he uses, the technical terms, I'm actually curious to see how he describes certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something a person uses a technical term, like just the way a technical term is used. For example, we once find reason in one way, and then another scholar would define reason in another way. Just the way the technical term is used alone, for just it blows my mind about, just changes my thinking, not only about that particular text, but wait, if you apply a line of thinking to somebody else's work, what does that mean for their work? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also going to be one of the valuable things is figuring out like what Kant means by reason, like what reason is, what reasoning turns out to be, how we can even get to that is itself a question. Like, don't we kind of already have to know what reason is in order to know what reason is? And I think that'll be one of the valuable things is there are technical terms that were introduced today that I skipped over on purpose, like the understanding and reason. Like, is there a distinction between understanding and reason, or are the two related? And if so, how? And all of these minute details, I think, are interesting points to get into. I think what Kant is valuable for is like getting us to see the question in the first place.
How, Thomas, could you show us what you've been drawing, and maybe that would be a nice conclusion.
You can't see it.
But
it's on the back of a it's the back of a paint. I don't know what you call it. It's not a paint strip. What do you call these things? These things where you
color swatch.
Use them to, yeah.
Color swatch.
Color swatch. There we go. You want to look very carefully.
Uh,
Can't really see it. Just looks like a grey.
Okay. I think it's a good place to close.
Yeah, and then we'll open up on the next
Yeah.
and get into the real excitement of the text. I think the next preface is somehow even more large than the first one.
Dope.
Hmm.
Okay, rad.
All right, comrades.
Yeah. Enjoy the
Thank
coming week.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you
Hadley.
for your time.
Thanks, Thomas.
Gents,
Thank
will
you,
you be
Hadley.
able- meet
And thank you, gents.
Sorry, will you guys
Sipho
be
Khan, yeah?
able to come through on Tuesday? Will you be
Yes,
able to
yes,
make
yes. I
Tuesday?
will be there on Tuesday.
Yeah.
No.
Wait, hold on. Actually, quickly, one last question about Tuesday. Has everyone had success with the Joe Sachs translation? Was it? I mean, it was literally just a thought. I'm prepared to go and look and see if I can download a better copy. But has everyone
I found a hard copy that's not Joe Sachs,
Oh, okay.
but I've got a hard copy. I'm happy with it.
Oh, okay.
No.
All right.
All right.
Cool.
Just checking. All right, gentlemen. Have a
Ciao,
lovely
eh.
evening. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.